Hey dudes, it's Lerald, and now that we are around a week into the Phrecia event, I have a big update for my league starter. So just to run through the sales pitch, I have upwards of 50 million burst DPS, I have enough tankiness to kill Uber Elder Deathless while not actually playing all that well. I have Mind Over Matter, Ailment Immunity, tons of life, Energy Shield, Mana Leech, some more defensive layers on top of that, a lot of block chance and some Fortify, weirdly. I have pretty good move speed, actually quite good move speed, and all of that is in a super easy to play build that I put together for a budget of like 9 divines. It was actually under 10, but 10 is a better number, so that's what's going in the thumbnail. Under 10 divines. So let me just hit on that last point too. This build doesn't have a lot of keybinds. It doesn't require a lot of effort to play really well. Whirling Blades and Flame Dash for movement. I have one cooldown skill in Sigil of Power that I use sometime, but mostly it's just walking around right-clicking. Pretty great. I am using 2 different automation setups to sort out all of the busy work, so this build isn't just strong, fast, and cheap, it's also easy. You can absolutely watch TV while playing this build. That's what I've been doing. This is looking like an early frontrunner for build of the league for me, build of the event, whatever you want to call it. It's insanely strong on an incredibly tight budget, and I would be real happy if Whisperer went into the core game, because this would probably become my new go-to build over like Toxic Rain Pathfinder, considering where that character is right now. I think I might even rather play this over Lightning Strike Slayer, if I'm being honest. The strength at the level of the budget here it's insane. So I cooked the initial idea up for this build several days ago, and I've kind of been refining it since that point, and it's definitely ready for prime time. So just to kind of contextualize some of the footage that's been playing here, a lot of this I hadn't even solved the problem of rage on yet, so I was doing like 25 to 30% less damage in the footage than I am now, with 0 gear changes. Okay, let's get into it. So the main reason that I started Power Siphon Mind Whisperer instead of Scavenger is I knew I wanted to smoothly transition into a mana stacker after the opening weekend without re-leveling another character. I didn't know what skill I wanted to use, but I knew I wanted to do lightning damage. I'm kind of combining a lot of my old favorites here, and some new ones too, things like Tinctures and Automation, but then also mana stacking, a little bit of dex stacking, tons of leech, and then multiple automation setups to make the build really into an incredible all-arounder. It is a great bosser, it does so much damage, and it can take a hit. But then obviously, you know, it's Lightning Strike, so it's just instantly a great mapper as well. Really a great build. And ultimately, I just triangulated back to the best skill in the game, my favorite skill even in the past when it was just really, really good instead of being the #1 skill, and I have 0 regrets on that. Lightning Strike is awesome. It also frees you up to take Nightblade, which is just so insanely strong. That lets you abuse Elusive. It's such a powerful buff that gives you tankiness, damage, and move speed, all in a single support gem. It's just like, it's really hard to believe that there are no other like build archetypes that have a support gem that gives this much power to them. Now there are definitely a lot of ways to put this build together, lots of ways to add more power at a higher cost, of course. A Mage Blade would be great, and there's definitely more than just one solution to the problems that we're solving with this build. But these are the ones I've gone with, and the reason for that is primarily in service of one main goal: keeping it cheap. So if you have a question like, why not use Vol Lightning Strike? Like, technically this isn't a Vol Lightning Strike build, this is just a Lightning Strike build. Why not run Indigon? It's more expensive, that's it. So with that being said, Vol Lightning Strike could probably double the damage of the build in terms of like burst damage potential, so like 75 to 100 million burst DPS if you set your orbs right, instead of only 52 million DPS. And that would probably cost like another 1.5 divines, maybe 2. Really not bad. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into the PoB. And this is what my tree looks like. We'll start with the Ascendancy here. So the big things that I've changed, obviously, from the Locust Mine setup, I'm not doing anything with Fork. I'm not doing anything with Return Projectiles. I experimented with that for a little bit, but enough of your damage in Lightning Strike is kind of split between the melee hit and the projectiles. So it just doesn't really make sense to try and like spend so much effort, so much budget on that when we're doing this as such a super low budget build. So as you can see, it says 26 million DPS. The thing about Lightning Strike is, just to kind of show that off in game, you know, when you Lightning Strike, it does this. It does the strike from the heavens, that's the melee hit, and then these projectiles, right? But you're able to get, from this mastery here, the attack mastery that gives you non-vol strike skills targeting an additional enemy, you're able to get 2 hits. So if I was trying to hit like the red guy there, you know, the Exarch, I could stand back a little bit, and my extra hit would spawn on top of him, but then the hit that I'm throwing out would spawn the projectiles, which did go out and hit him. This is called double hitting, and it's a pretty common thing in lightning strike setups, pretty old tech. And it's just like a really important thing to try to optimize whenever you're bossing, and it genuinely will double your damage, depending on exactly how much of your damage split is between projectiles and the initial hit. But yeah, obviously a pretty huge damage increase to be able to get that double hit off, and that's really good. There's one thing you can do to make getting the double hits off a little easier, and that's to take Scion's Ambition. The way this reads, you would think it would only apply to skills that are hitting 2 targets, but that's actually not true. It just makes it so that all of your lightning strikes do that double hit from 40% further away, so it's way easier to pull that off. And the main reason that I haven't gone with that is just simply, again, cheapness. Prodigal Perfection costs like, I don't know, maybe 1 chaos to apply, and it's like a 10% damage or 12% damage increase. And Scion's Ambition makes it easier to double your damage, so technically it would lower the sheet DPS a little bit, but probably actually raise the real DPS in bossing, but it just costs more. So that's really the only reason that I didn't go with that. Alright, continuing with the Ascendancy, we're still taking an Infinite Pursuit, and we know all. You get 1 mana per dex instead of 1 mana every 2 int, so obviously that's a pretty significant increase in mana, especially if you're able to stack some decks, which our deck stacking is very low, very budget at this point, but obviously we can scale that up quite a lot. And then We Know All turns that mana stacking into extra damage. It increases the mana cost of your skills, but because we're doing a mana stacker and doing the traditional mana stacking setup, this is not a problem. We're able to leech. I think I'm leeching, 1,700 mana per second, so that's working pretty easily. And then we kind of have a choice here, right? Like, I played around with There Is More here for some power charges. This gives you quite a bit of extra damage. The extra frenzy and power charges are good, and then not having to generate the charges early on kind of helps in ramping up your damage on enemies, so this is really good. But the reality is there are just very easy ways to solve the problem of power charge generation, and this does not add nearly as much damage as Wait a Little. Wait a Little makes it so that it's very, very, very easy to hit 30 rage while you're fighting a boss or fighting a pack of monsters in a map, and that then allows you to turn on Berserk, and you can just put this on automation, which I have, and that is a huge damage increase just over the base 30 rage. And if I show off the value of rage, check this out. I'm going to set my rage from 30 to 0. That's a lot of damage. That is a lot more damage than we get out of There Is More. So as much as I like There Is More, I love the consistency that it provided. It just clearly was inferior to taking Wait a Little and having pretty much 30 rage all the time. There are little periods of time where you will burn it all out from Berserk, but most of the time that's because you're moving between pulls, because everything died instantly. And so there you go. That's the Ascendancy, right? As for the rest of the passive tree, I have kind of shifted some things around and done some stuff that I really wanted to do with the original build, but just didn't have the points to make it work. And I've come and taken Magebane, so that really helps solve suppression, between some of the suppression on gear, that gets us over the hump. And I'm not even taking Inveterate in order to get that, or Intuition, although you could take one or either of those and free yourself up of some suffixes. That is going to cost you some valuable points in order to do that. I have come down here and taken Utmost Swiftness, which obviously helps with the suppression as well. And then critical point here, Cornered Prey and Bleeding Mastery. This will make it so that you're very easily able to bleed enemies. You'll be bleeding them basically guaranteed, unless it is a map where enemies can avoid bleed, which those are bad. And that gives you a bunch of crit chance and crit multi against bleeding enemies, and then the Mastery gives you even more crit chance, so it's really, really valuable for getting a lot of extra damage on enemies, basically just for attacking them. Lethality, because this is a projectile attack skill. Even though it is a projectile attack skill modifier here, right, it gives you increased crit chance and multiplier, it applies to both parts of it. Like if we show off the melee hit, if I drop it, lose a bunch of damage. So it applies to the melee hit because Lightning Strike is flagged as a projectile attack skill. It applies to the whole thing. There are a lot of things in Lightning Strike that only apply to the projectile hit or the melee side of things. Like if you get melee crit multi, that'll only apply to the melee hit. Projectile crit multi would only apply to the projectile hit, but this particular wheel applies to both. So then we have something that I think is a little unorthodox. I really grappled with this for a long time. We have Healthy Mind, which is just really good for any mana stacker. It causes your life mods to be turned into mana. And so this wheel right here, the Herbalism Wheel becomes this incredibly powerful mana stacking wheel, which that doesn't show up in PoB updated correctly, which is fine. But it does here. And then, you know, if you wanted to come over and take Intuition, you certainly could. That would also be a pretty good mana node instead of being a life node. You can see the difference in life and mana that I get out of that. And that's a lot of damage, right? That's adding a ton of damage. And as we'll kind of get to in a second, we're getting Mind Over Matter from our body armor. So we're not really losing out on defense. Like, actually, if I were to drop Healthy Mind, I would actually lose a lot of max hit and effective health pool. Then, of course, we're taking some Frenzy Charge stuff, taking Frenzy and Power Charge stuff up here. Didn't think it was worth it to come out all the way over here. Like I said before, we are doing this multi-shot wheel and taking the Attack Mastery for the extra hit on our Lightning Strike so that we can do the double hit tech. We're obviously taking Piercing Shots, so we're getting 3 pierces. I think that's enough for clearing under, 99% of normal circumstances. You're hitting quite often. That should be enough, but technically you can get more pierce out of like glove implicits or something if you feel the need. We are running all evasion items, so evasion mastery, that'll give us 15% more free suppress. So between that and Mage Bane, we get like 60% suppress just out of our tree without even having to take Inveterate. And then kind of the thing that I'm doing just to, again, cut costs for like the millionth time is I'm just taking all of these base nodes around Trickster because they're really great. You get like a lot of max mana, you get a lot of life, you get some life and mana on kill, which actually does help a lot in map sustain. Totally doable without this, right? You could drop all this and take Cluster Jewels here instead, and that would shoot your damage up quite a bit. I have a alternate tree on exactly that I'll go over in a little bit, but you just get some really good stuff up in here. Assassination helps a bit with crit chance, just a lot of like very basic generic stuff that you can kind of basically you can run this build at like level 80 or something, and then just as you're progressing through those next set of levels, the next 10, 12, 15 levels, you can just throw points up here. Now, up in this section is really like the meaty part of the tree, and this is where I'm doing something that is definitely like a budget option that is like kind of weird, is I'm running a Lethal Pride, even though this is a dex stacking build. Lethal Pride gives you strength on all of your small passives in the area, but then it has a modifier that's really, really good that doesn't show up on Brutal Restraint. Brutal Restraint is kind of the dex equivalent. It has this modifier, 5% chance to deal double damage, and I just was able to find one for a couple of divines. I think it was the most expensive item I paid for in the build, and it's like 5% chance to deal double, 5, 5, 5 on a lot of these. I think I got a life increase somewhere around here. There we go, on Claws of the Hawk. And so I took a lot of nodes in here, and the only one that I would say, if I didn't have this Lethal Pride here, that I would not use is Claws of the Magpie, but Claws of the Magpie actually has some pretty good quality of life. It gives you attack speed and, just a decent amount of damage along the way, but more importantly, that chance to steal charges is actually kind of good. It turns map mods that make enemies generate charges into a positive for you. You can just randomly steal endurance charges, helps with sustaining charges while mapping, so actually not a bad node at all, even though it's a little expensive to come get it. Because of that chance to deal double damage, just winds up being like 4.5% damage per point, or 5.5, which is very, very good, but not mandatory. Now, as you can see, my strength is kind of high. You definitely don't need the Lethal Pride. If I were to drop the Lethal Pride entirely, my strength would drop down to 86, but we could show here the only thing that I really need that much strength for is Berserk, so we could just lower the skill gem level if needed, and that could work, right? That would definitely still be very functional even without that gem at all, just a rare jewel in there, or even like a Brutal Restraint. Just here's like an example Brutal Restraint, that could work. Now, the downside of doing this, and the thing I really don't love about it, is that it does mean you lose out on Ghost Dance, which we're not stacking a crazy amount of evasion rating. I maybe got like 10k or something. We're not using Grace. So Ghost Dance isn't like incredible, but it's a little bit of defensive layer that we're like losing out on. I'm willing to make that sacrifice because the amount of damage I'm adding is so high. But very realistically, you could take Ghost Dance, you could flip-flop the Healthy Mind and a Lethal Pride, or a Brutal Restraint that's like really well rolled down into this area, and potentially gain more damage out of that, and then still be able to take Ghost Dance. And that could be pretty good. Also, if you are running a Brutal Restraint, which let me switch to a Brutal Restraint just to show this off, there is the potential to take Second Sight, which gives you more melee crit chance while you're blind. That won't apply to the projectiles, right? but it will apply to the melee hit, so it's still a pretty good damage increase. And then, you know, you're blind, so you're going to have lower chance to hit. We fix this with our weapon craft, which just makes it so that our hits can't be, or our attacks can't be evaded, so that doesn't matter. And then the only real downside is that we lose some evasion rating, which, I mean, you know, not the end of the world to lose a little bit of evasion rating. I guess it's quite a bit, but, you know, not the absolute end of the world to lose some of that. Ultimately, I didn't go that way, but it was specifically just an issue of cost. Now, another thing you could do, the thing that I'm maybe thinking about doing long term, is taking Tempered by War, which will convert half of your cold and lightning damage taken into fire, and then pair that with Maxottle's Machination, which gives you, I think it's Divine Flesh, converts half of all of your elemental damage into chaos. So if you were to run those together, you don't need to run any cold or lightning res at all. You could just run all fire and all chaos res, and that could really help out. So I think that pretty much covers most of the passive tree. There is one thing I really want to hit on, or I guess a couple of things I want to hit on, and one is this Lightning Mastery. It shows that it doesn't do anything for your damage. You know, if I drop it, it doesn't show up, but that's very misleading. So this gives you 30% of your max mana scalars applying to shock effect. So I'm pretty much sitting at 50% shock effect on most bosses. In my config, I set it to 40, just based off of like looking at some of my kind of scuffed Uber Elder footage. I was sitting at like 40 during some of my burst phases, or 45%, but I'm really hitting closer to 50 on most of those bosses, so that's pretty dope. There is a possibility if your damage were even higher, you could maybe go to like the 15% max effective shock, try and take advantage of that, and maybe instead of the crit mastery that gives you 25 crit multi against uniques, try the 50% increased effective non-damaging ailments with crits. Like that could maybe be an option to try that and try and push your crit, your shock value above 50%, but I'm very happy with 50%. So happy even that I set it to 40% just to be a little conservative. Okay, and then there are two other things. One is this Mark Mastery that gives you a Frenzy Charge, or chance to get a Frenzy Charge when you hit a marked enemy. This is super important for generating Frenzy Charges in single target, so you absolutely do want to run this. And then the Claw Mastery that gives you supported skills supported by Nightblade have increased effective elusive. You get a lot of elusive value, so much so that it is worth it to come over here and take this Dagger Wheel, which does not work with claws because it gives you increased elusive effect, which does, and you know, so whatever generic move speed and some like strength because we got the Lethal Pride there, but also this mastery that gives you 40% crit multi for skills supported by Nightblade. So this wheel, which is a Dagger Wheel, is giving us, just to show it off, if I take the mastery, it is giving how much per point? It is giving 3.5% damage per point. Absolutely worth it. That is very good. Definitely good. Gives you, I mean, you can see right here, right? I go from 552 to 598. Very good. With that being said, if there was something you were going to cut, this is probably the weakest link of all of the nodes throughout the whole tree, other than like this branch here. If you were going to cut something to try and fit in more cluster jewels or something, this is probably the spot to go after. All right, now let's talk about skills. So I'm using Lightning Strike, elemental damage with attacks, multi-strike, Nightblade. Those are all pretty much standard, so you're going to run those three as your standard supports. Then you kind of have some wiggle room on the other two. I'm running Energy Leech for two reasons. One, we're using Blood Rage elsewhere, so we're never on full Energy Shield, which means we're always leeching Energy Shield. So it's a 24% more damage multiplier. You do have to toggle that config on. Are you leeching Energy Shield? But as long as you do, you know, it's a pretty good damage increase, 24% more damage, that's pretty good. So this is obviously not a massive amount of leech, right? And there are other ways to get leech. You can get some from like lightning damage cluster jewels. You can get leech into your energy shield from one of the notables on that. That's an option. But I've been using this because having played with and without it, I found that, at least in mapping, I really liked the amount of defensive value that it gave. Even though it doesn't seem like it's a ton of leech, I mean, it's not a ton, it was definitely enough to keep my energy shield up and running and feeling like it was doing something, because without that, you know, if I just like, let me take my automation support out and hit Blood Rage here, right? If I don't do that, Blood Rage is always going to be on, and I'm not leeching into my energy shield. So my energy shield is effectively just gone, and I don't have Ghost Dance. So there's really no value to the energy shield at all without that ES leech. So I think it's worth it, even though it's not like the most optimal thing in the world. Also, we need a way to generate power charges consistently, and while Assassin's Mark is able to very slightly generate them in single target, Enough so that I think it can sustain on its own and on bosses, but it's not amazing. But in like AoE situations, you're absolutely not able to sustain power charges without Peacock. So that's what I'm taking. I'm just taking power charge on crit, and that still gives us like 16% more damage. This is probably my biggest disappointment with the build. The biggest weakness with the build is just not having there is more. Ultimately, as you can see from the footage of me mapping, like it's totally fine. If you wanted to drop Energy Leech, you really have two options. I think Awakened Lightning Pin is by far the best option, and if you level it up to 5, you also get built-in Lightning Exposure, so that frees you up a Gloves implicit that we'll talk about in a bit. If you didn't want to go that way and you wanted to go a little cheaper, regular Lightning Pin, I think is still the best move. Plus, it's easy to swap them. You know, you're running 2 green, 2 red, and 2 blue for your sockets. If you wanted to run Inspiration, you could. It looks really good numerically, but it reduces your mana cost, which actually makes it harder to generate rage through wait a little. So I actually think Inspiration is bad. But that's my opinion. Maybe there's some way that you could like make that work and be good, but I don't think it's good. I think it's bad. I think Energy Leech is pretty great for mapping, and if you want to swap it out for Lightning Pin for bossing for a little extra damage, that seems like a pretty good idea to me. Whirling Blades is pretty standard, faster attacks, culling, but I've also hooked in Fortify just to get like Fortify stacks, and I've actually been really surprised by like how much more defense that has added quite a bit of extra defense. I think I'm averaging maybe like 10 or 12 Fortify stacks or so, 15, sure, why not? Generally speaking, I would say a lot of the time I'm hitting closer to just like 20 or 21 because I have that one extra stack from my, what is it, Lethal Pride? Yeah, Lethal Pride giving me one extra Fortify stack from Arcing Blows. I do feel like I hit 21 Fortify pretty often, and I'm often running around with that much Fortify in maps. All right, Purity of Elements, we're running with an Eternal Blessing. This is pretty simple, right? We're able to have all of our mana pool unreserved while still getting an aura, and because my resistances are very, very bad, Purity of Elements fixes those and gives ailment immunity, which is pretty great. You know, I had a point in one of my maps earlier today. I was before I was doing this recording, I was just getting some footage, and like I died a couple of times in one of the maps, and I was like, really didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why I was getting hit so hard, and it was like 4 or 5 more maps later where I hadn't died in any of those other ones where I realized that my Purity of Elements, I guess I'd fat fingered it, was just off. And that is maybe the one downside of your mana not being reserved, is you do need to make sure you pay attention. So consider that a PSA, but yeah, I mean, you get something like, what is this, like 120 or 117 all res out of Purity of Elements, and also ailment immunity, which is pretty huge. The only other aura I would maybe run in its place if you fixed resistances and all that elsewhere is haste. That would just give you like a lot more damage. It would give you like 12% more damage and then 20% move speed, which would be pretty good. Assassin's Mark and a Mark on hit setup. This is value, you know, it adds a lot of crit and crit multi. It adds a chance to generate a power charge on hit, so that's pretty good, and then it's just automatic marking. Berserk, Automation, and Blood Rage all hooked into each other in the weapon is what I've gone with. This just automates 2 of your biggest buffs. Blood Rage helps with generating Frenzy charges. You get Frenzy charges on kill, and you get a lot of attack speed out of it. Berserk just gives you a lot of extra value on your rage, so that makes that 30 rage be worth... what is it worth at max value? 20% more or 60% increased rage effect. So yeah, instead of being worth 30, it's worth like closer to 50. That's pretty good. Obviously, not mandatory, but it does add about 12% more DPS, so pretty good. Then here's the big one, Arcane Cloak. Arcane Cloak is kind of the big reason that this build is able to do so much damage. It also is a big defensive shield. It burns 64% of your current mana, so at full, it would burn, you know, 64%. In fact, I can pop it here, you see, right? Blows away a lot of mana. Now, some people want to automate this. I prefer to. I think it's very tedious to hit it over and over again throughout mapping. The base duration on it is something like 3 seconds, but we have a more duration support hooked up to it, so it's going to last closer to 4.5 seconds. And then the cooldown is going to be like a little under 4 seconds. So we're going to have over 50% uptime on this. And while it's active, it gives you flat added lightning damage equal to 14% of the mana you spent on the skill, which is an absolutely gargantuan amount of flat damage. Like if we turn that off, yeah, that's like doubling our damage basically while it's active, which is pretty huge. Like if we turn off every single one of the temporary damage, but you know, turn off every flask, every bit of Arcane Cloak, turn off Berserk as well. If we turn all of that off, then our absolute floor on damage is maybe like 12 million DPS, but it's very easy to have all of these buffs up. I mean, we have more than 50% uptime on Arcane Cloak. We're able to have well over 50% uptime on our Tincture. We're able to have pretty good uptime on our Flasks. So I think we actually spend more time in our burst window than we do out of our burst window, which is pretty great. And Arcane Cloak is a huge part of that. So getting more duration and then getting Enhance on that as well just increases the quality, and the quality increases the buff effect. So it's just a big damage increase to have that Enhance in there as well. Something you can do prior to getting an Enhance is put Arcane Surge in there, and that'll make it so every time this triggers, Arcane Surge will also trigger and give you just a lot more mana regen, kind of help compensate for the cost. So what I've been doing instead is I hooked a level 8 Arcane Surge up to a level 20 Flame Dash. I think this will work even at like level 18, and that also is able to guarantee Arcane Surge every single cast of Flame Dash. Here we go. Arcane Surge triggers if you spend at least 41 mana, and with a level 20 Flame Dash along with this passive right here, We Know All. It's 43 mana for Flame Dash, so that is able to work for everyone. I think if we bump Arcane Surge up to level 9, then it becomes 51 mana, so it wouldn't work. And then finally, our one cooldown that we actually use, Sigil of Power. Whenever you're going to fight a boss, you just pop the Sigil of Power. It gives you a bunch of flat added lightning damage, and all you have to do is spend mana in the pool in order for that value to go up. And, you know, it kind of looks cool as well, and it gives you some damage reduction as well. So that took me a little while to build up because I didn't have everything quite ramping, but in actual combat, that'll come out quite a lot faster. You'll have it at max stacks pretty quickly and adding a lot of flat damage. All right, now let's talk about gear. So the Claw is kind of an essential part here. It is a mana, spell damage, attack speed Claw, which this is a little bit weird. So I'll just show it how to craft this. All right, here we are. So you do want to start with Imperial Claw. That's just the best option in terms of the combination of attack speed and crit chance and flat damage. And I cannot remember the exact item level requirement that you're going to want to go with, so let's just take a look. All right, so 81 item level is kind of the ideal. That'll give you the option of the T1 max mana roll. At the very least, item level 77, so you could get a T1 attack speed roll. That's kind of the bare minimum. And spell damage is not something they can roll on a Claw. As you can see, it's not an option. So we do have to use, we'll go with like a level 81, right? So we're going to be using essences in order to do this. We're going to be using essences of woe because those force spell damage on. The thing though is we're going to be starting with a fractured base ideally, so you could start with like a kind of a lower attack speed fractured base. That would actually be pretty great. That is not what I started with. I started with a fractured mana base that was a lot cheaper. Not necessarily as good, but you know, cheaper. Definitely harder to craft. It's going to take you more time. Basically what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to roll with these essences of woe until you have the other mod that you're looking for. In this case, I would just be rolling until I had attack speed, good attack speed roll, and then in this case, what I would want to do is ultimately just annul off. You know, there's some meta crafting that you could try and do. Like you could try and do like cannot roll caster mods and at least protect the spell damage, but that's still not going to protect the attack speed. There's not really a ton you can do. Ultimately, you just have to kind of lucky annul, and do that. You just roll and lucky annul until you get spell damage, mana, and attack speed. Those would be the 3 mods that you want on there. And then at that point, you're home free. You just can have up to 3 crafted modifiers, and then you want to craft the Veiled modifier, crit chance, and strength and int. All right, that'll work. And then the other one would just be hits can't be evaded. Super easy, right? And so this is why I think it is a little bit better to start with a base that has like fractured attack speed instead. Ultimately, you know, you're going to go with whatever fits into your budget, but that would be ideal because then it's a little easier to craft because mana just shows up a lot more. In fact, I rolled through a couple of mana rolls there. But then also, if you had a claw that looked like this, spell damage, max mana, attack speed, and then another suffix, you could just do this. You could just craft a prefixes can't be changed, right? You just craft prefixes, can't be changed, and then scour, and that would remove the other suffix, and then you could do all of the 3 crafted mods, and the crit chance, and the evade, and so on. That's it. And so that's the only complex like crafting project in this whole piece of this whole setup. Everything else is pretty simple. This is just like a block, chance, and suppress, and dex, and life, and resistance shield. Nothing special. I think I bought this for like 50 chaos. I had one that was kind of better than this, but it just didn't have quite enough suppress. And so I was sitting at like 98 suppress or something, and that was just bumming me out. 92 suppress or something. So I bought this for a little bit, but nothing special. Mind of the Council. This is just simply a unique that gives you a lot of flat damage based on your max mana, and also converts some of your lightning damage, basically mind over matter's lightning damage taken. Great. It also has a big max mana roll on it and gives you some chalk chance. All good. Very, very valuable. Obviously very good for this Ascendancy. And kind of expensive. I think I paid like 1.5 divines for this though, so not too bad. You know, this gives you mind over matter, it gives you a bit of mana regen, gives you a lot of flat mana, and then some ES and evasion. That's pretty cool. Mind over matter is a pretty great keystone, especially for this Ascendancy, but it's very far. You know, it's like 12 travel points to get over there, so just kind of brutal to get to. Cloak of Defiance fixes that. It's an option to not use Cloak of Defiance, but I think it's worth it. The gloves, just to show these off in game, these were a bit of a project to get the implicits right on. I just was unlucky, but ultimately this is just a pair of fractured gloves that I bought, and then I just rolled them with Essences of Zeal until I had, you know, the attack speed essence. I just rolled them with those until I got dex and like a halfway decent resistance, and then I crafted increased damage while leeching. That is another big advantage of running the energy leech support, is by having Blood Rage on, we're always leeching energy shield even if we're at full life, and so then we can run increased damage while leeching on our gloves, and that's like 4.5% more damage, so that's pretty good too. The boots, these are ones that I think I ROG crafted, or maybe I just found them. You know, it's just like a little bit of life, and then like some move speed, some resistances, and dex. Nothing special there at all. The rings I ROG crafted, they suck. They are terrible rings. They have dex, they have mana, they have resistance, and they have LE damage with attack skills, which that LE damage with attack skills roll is pretty low. It's not really even all that great. But they do both have mana, dex, and resistances, and then room to craft max life on them. But like both of these, they don't have resistance on their implicit, so that's not great. And they both have a suffix that is just a total turd. This one, it's int, which I don't need that int at all. And this one, it's mana regen, which, I mean, I'm not upset about the mana regen, but it's just not that great. So in both of these cases, I'm losing out on, you know, like 40 resistance on each one on the suffix and 30 on the implicit. So I'm losing like 140 resistance between these two rings potentially. So that's, you know, that's a very corner cutting, cost cutting situation there, right? That is ultimately the reason why my Chaos Res is just a base of -60. That is what I would be trying to fix with these rings if I were to kind of actually upgrade the character some more and like really up my costs, is I would try and fix my Chaos Res by just getting more resistance on my rings. I got it at editing and realized I forgot to mention the shield. You know, it's an evasion shield. It does have the 9% increased move speed implicit, which is cool, but otherwise increased block chance is just like a good defensive value to get on a shield. The evasion rating's kind of whatever. The suppress is obviously important to hit the suppress cap. I'm exactly on the dot. The dex is an okay roll. The res is an okay roll. Like, this is really not a great shield, but it's a stat stick. You can get attack speed as a suffix on your shields, and like if I were to kind of fix up some of my resistances elsewhere, that would be a stat I would be shooting for. High suppress, high block chance, high dex, high attack speed, and then kind of fill in the rest. The amulet is kind of the piece that ties everything together. It has a lot of really good benefits. You know, it gives you mana regen, gives you max mana, gives you mana regen again. Like, all that's very normal mana stackery stuff. But then it also has the line of giving you 25% reduced attribute requirements, which really helps with the strength and int. Not that I need it. Clearly, I have more than enough strength and int. But in getting the character kind of up and running, it really helped a lot. And if I were to kind of sort out some of the stuff like the Lethal Pride and the ring suffix, then suddenly my int strength would go down a lot, and having those requirements be quite low because of Aziri's foible helps a ton. All right, last piece of gear, Oxium. You know, this is just a really good like power charge and kind of mana related belt. It gives you some energy shield and some mana and some LE damage based on your power charges. If I were to drop this belt, I would lose something like 12-13% damage. So this is better than the majority of rare belts in terms of damage output. You could swap it though for like just a good old Stygian Vice for more defense. That could certainly work. The Mana Leech isn't like really doing all that much for us. All right, I lied. There's one more piece of gear to consider, and that would be the Prismatic Tincture. I considered running 4 flasks, and there's just no way. A Prismatic Tincture adds so much damage when it's rolled correctly. I self-rolled this. Like I said, I crafted about half of this gear, or found it, you know, like the boots and the rings and so on. And then I think about the other half of the gear, the Fractured Weapon and gloves, I did buy from people, and then the uniques. Actually, the Oxium I've found, but the Mind of the Council, Etziri's Foible, and Cloak of Defiance I did buy. With this I rolled myself, and what you're looking for is just simply a combo of increased effect, mana, and mana burn rate on the prefix, and then melee weapon damage penetrates LA resistances. This could definitely be better. You know, it's tier 2, it's not max level. I did a pretty good job on the implicit, but that could be 100% instead of 98. And the way it works is really simple. You have so much mana and mana regen in this build that you're just super able to sustain a tincture like really long term with very little difficulty. I don't even know if it's working in Hideout. I don't think so. But normally what happens is you press a button and it starts burning your mana, starts at 1% per second, and then it stacks up and up and up and up and up. But you're able to leech through that really, really effectively, and then you can turn it off and have it go on cooldown. That's definitely something you can do manually. I do that because I'm worried about hitting 0 mana, but anytime you kind of hit 0 mana and turn the thing off, you immediately leech back to full, and then you're ready to press that button again as soon as it's available again. So the only thing I'm like iffy on is the fact that I'm still running a life flask. I'm just doing that because I'm scared to die, basically. If I had like a mage blood, right, but if I had a mage blood, I would run 4 flasks and a tincture. Maybe you could run a 3 flask corrupted mage blood that you buy on a budget or something. But the tincture adds so much damage. Like if we show that off in PoB, turning that off, it's like almost doubling your damage. So there's just no justification for not running a tincture if you're playing Lightning Strike. All right, so I did say I was going to talk a little bit about some upgrade options, and this is one of them. This is the tree here that I kind of cooked up a little bit. Dropped this upper branch and added in some cluster jewel setup here, and here we have this lightning damage cluster jewel that I kind of cooked up. It seems pretty nice. Scintillating Idea, giving you lightning pin and max mana is really, really good. This orienting display, helping with blind, is really good. You also can get blind from a Tattoo of the Tessalio Warrior. You do have to give up a 1 dex node, but it's worth it to basically just permanently blind all enemies, reduce their hit chance, and that'll certainly help a lot with getting hit less. And then you can get Storm Drinker. Lightning damage will be leached directly as energy shield. You get some lightning res out of that. And so by doing that, you actually then can justify dropping energy leech, I think, and just take Awakened Ellie Pen all the time. And that's really, really good. One thing I wanted to mention with the Awakened Ellie Pin is right now on the gloves, I'm getting lightning exposure from the Eater of Worlds implicit. You can go for an extra projectile pierce on your gloves out of the Eater option. Like that's something you could also just do like suppress chance. It's not super great, but it's definitely like an option you can go for kind of on a budget. And then in the medium cluster jewel, pressure points gives you a lot of extra damage, and quick getaway is super great. Like you just gives you a lot of move speed, which is really dope, and crit chance. And this can help with crit chance. And then also by having a cluster jewel, you open up some like jewel spots. And these seem like incredibly good jewels, this Luminous Eye and Spirit Vessel. And they are, but these are actually just jewels that I found doing heist. Just fractured crit multi jewels that I then rolled with Harvest to get more crit multi. Pretty good, right? And that can help a lot with fixing stats or resistances or what have you. Now, something I didn't include in here, but I do just want to mention is split personality. A dex mana split personality is pretty expensive, but definitely a good option for adding a ton of dex and mana. Something you could do is like try and navigate down, kind of make like a twisty path down around here to this node, or maybe up to this node, or potentially even come over and get Mind of Matter and try and go over here. Although that would be quite a stretch. That would really require rethinking the build a lot, but trying to min-max the value of the split personality for more dex and mana is definitely a good idea. And then Garokan's Flight, I didn't fit that into the build as of yet, but that is definitely an option. If you're able to get 1,000 dex or something, that's 200 max life out of the boots, along with some good quality of life and being immune to burning ground. So there you go. Those are like some upgrade options for the build. Not that I feel like it needs any of them. You know, it cranks even on the very low budget that I'm operating on at the moment. But obviously there's incredible room for growth, which I think is why I'm so excited about this build. So I love it. I would absolutely like to spend more time playing it in future leagues. That would not be a problem for me at all, even if I go another way, more like Trickster or something. It really just reminds me how much I love Lightning Strike and mana stackers. But you know, ultimately, if they said, sorry, Warden, we tried you for a league and it's just not working out, we're gonna make Whisperer be the new Pathfinder Ascendancy, or new Ranger Ascendancy, that would be my new main. So long, Pathfinder, I'm a Whisperer now. There's just so much more room to expand this build even further with more investment. Indigon I didn't even mention, but obviously that's an option as well, but that's like 45 divines for one of those. Then the split personality jewels, cluster jewels, corruptions, and tons of other high-end gear can all really send the damage to the stars and actually scale up the defensiveness in a huge way as well. Alright, that's it. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and you want to see more like it, and if you want to support us even further, consider becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching and have fun with Lightning Strike. Again. Bye.